Start with the heart. Why transactional fundraising is failing leaders and what comes next. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, John Kundtz. Welcome to another edition of the Disruptor Podcast. For those that are new to our show, the Disruptor series is your blueprint for groundbreaking innovation. We started the podcast in December of 2022. Our vision was to go beyond conventional wisdom by confronting the status quo and exposing the raw power of disruptive thinking. And today's guest embodies that spirit. Bill Crouch, CEO of BrightDot, has spent over 40 years helping not-for-profits and organizations transform fundraising from transactional processes into a catalyst for lasting change through the art of fundraising, where science, strategy, and human connection converge. Today, we'll explore how traditional fundraising models are breaking down what not-for-profit leaders must do differently to build trust, connection, and momentum. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you, John. Delighted.
It's great to have you here. We'll get into this in a second, but I think you and I have spent a good bit of our professional careers in the not-for-profit space. And I was thinking about this. I don't want us to sound old, but I think our combined experiences were probably over 70 years of experience, maybe closer to 80 or 85. But anyway, before we get started, tell us a little bit about your background, your education, your experiences. How'd you get here? Start anywhere you want.
Started out in college wanting to be involved in the nonprofit world. I went and got my doctor's degree. I went on the faculty and staff of the university. I was there for about 6 months when the president invited me to his office, which was a scary moment for me as a young faculty member. And he said to me, "I think you could be a college president one day. I like who you are. I like how you think, but you got to learn how to raise money. So I want to put you in the development office. I want you to create a corporate and foundation strategy for the college. And then I want you to be my chauffeur. And I want you to ride with me where I go to see donors, because that's going to be the best way for me to mentor you." So that led me to getting another doctor's degree, basically, by this wonderful individual. Led me to becoming a director of development of a statewide nonprofit. Then I became a vice president of development for another college. Then I became president of Georgetown College in Kentucky, where I was for 20 years. And you know, John, one of the things about these small private liberal arts colleges, even 20 years ago, we're always the underdogs. You know, we're competing against large public universities. We're competing against the United Way and everybody else. And there's just so many reasons for people to give. And in my particular college, we had 1,200 undergraduate students, was our student body. We had no master's degree program. Our job was to help prepare students to go to graduate school. And I had to figure out how to compete against others for the philanthropic dollar, because I was not getting any state money. I built 17 buildings when I was there and didn't get a penny from the state or federal government. It all had to be private fundraising. So I had to become very disruptive in how I thought about going out and competing against the University of Kentucky, which was 12 miles down the road, and had tickets to basketball games and football games and all those type of things. Then I got involved with the Jerry Panis fundraising firm in Chicago. I was a senior managing partner there for a couple of years, but decided that wasn't my why. What I really wanted to do is to help the smaller organizations, smaller colleges, a lot of community colleges, to think differently about how they went about fundraising. But now I've been doing it for BrightDot's 11 years old now, and we've had over 150 clients, and we've had a lot of success.
It's excellent. I love that story. I also love the fact that you focused in on liberal arts, because I'm a product of a liberal arts education. Again, it's relatively small, just up the road, if you will, up 75
Yep.
at Denison University in Granville. And so again, they struggle with some of the same things. What I love about liberal arts, just a side note, is especially today, I wouldn't be where I was today without a liberal arts education, even though I was a scientist and got dual major, the science degree and then the the liberal arts degree, and it really helped me think, critical thinking, problem solving, all these things you need, especially today when things are just sort of going to go upside down with all the technology changes.
Right.
But anyway, what I think makes this discussion interesting is we do have sort of a parallel track, although it be different. When I joined IBM in 1984, the first thing they said is you need to get involved on boards and community. It's part of the culture of IBM was to not only sell stuff to our clients, but also to give back, and it put it into our DNA. I've been spending time on the board side of not-for-profits for over 36, 7, 8 years now. So I've seen a lot of the things you talked about in your book and some things we'll talk about today. I think it'll be a great sort of melting of our two roles, you on the, I'll call it on the sell side and me on the board side.
Right. Yeah.
But speaking of that, so what are some of the biggest mistakes you see not-for-profit leaders making when taking this more traditional transactional approach to fundraising? Because when I started it was just bang stuff out, send them letters, send them this, invite them to a benefit or whatever. And that's, in my mind, clearly changed.
It's changed for a lot of reasons. One, the demographics of the country have changed a lot. Secondly, the tax incentives for the middle class, where they're itemizing their deductions. Now they get an automatic deduction. So that's changed. The way young couples and families operate are so differently now. There's a whole lot more competition for time, investments, and philanthropy that people have, and the transactional way just won't work. But I tell you, and just recently, John, I've begun to really realize that one of the real challenges of being a CEO of a small nonprofit or a liberal arts college is risking investing in something now that will have a long-term gain. You know, I always was, when I was coming through this, you only had to do one thing to keep your board happy. And that's to balance the budget every year, right? Which is a detriment to trying to think long-term. So I know it, like in my company this year, I invested in 4 long-term strategies that meant that I had an unbalanced budget this year, but next year we're going to see the rewards of that, right? That's not the thinking that you see there. And so when we go in and say, hey, we want to help, we call it build you a philanthropic engine for the future, but you're going to have to invest up front before you start seeing the ROI. That's a very difficult decision because that might mean not balancing the budget that year.
Correct.
And you know, from your board perspective, that's always a chief concern. It's interesting to me too that board members who can be risk takers in their businesses and risk takers in how they invest in technology and stuff for the future, but once they come to the board at the college, a lot of that risk taking goes away, and it's just a different kind of mentality that takes place. So we're always trying to talk that way with our clients. Invest. It's different from an expense.
Right. And it's a tough conversation to have. I think some of that has to do with the fact that a lot of board members are corporate and they're coming from for-profit, publicly traded companies, and having worked for one for 40 years. I know we were very coin operated. It was like, what have you done this quarter? And it's an interesting balance because as a board chair now and a board member and been on finance committees and governance committees and you name it, you don't want to get in a position where your programming paces your ability to pay for it, because at least the not-for-profits I work with, which are not educational institutions as much, but they're great at programming. You got to balance that because you don't want it to be in a situation where you're trying to ask people to donate to put good money after bad, because nobody wants to be in that. It takes some real tenacity, for lack of a better word, to balance the need to make investments, especially today, as you mentioned. It's a different world than it was 30 years ago as far as that fundraising piece. But at the same time, some of these smaller folks are right on the edge of not making it.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of my favorite stories is about the Woodruffs and Emory University, and they're getting ready to build a big science building. And at the groundbreaking, the development staff wanted everybody to come to have a test tube given to them as they got there with a rose in it. And they wanted to say to Mr. Woodruff, we have a special test tube for you. It's gold. And we promise to you for the rest of your life, every single day, we're going to deliver a red rose to your office. Well, the CFO went crazy. He started adding up. Well, what if he lives to be 65? What if he lives to be 75? How much is that going to cost us? How much is the gas to deliver it to his office and all of that? But they went ahead and did it. And after a year, one day, Mr. Woodruff called the president of Emory and said, nobody delivered a rose to me today. And all of a sudden they realized, and when he left $100 million in his estate to the university or something like that, but the thinking, the CFO, no, we can't spend that kind of money for that. And that's one of the challenges we run into all the time is getting people to believe that these investments will pay off 5 and 10 times.
Penny wise and pound foolish, as they say. $100 million can buy a lot of roses.
Right.
That's so cool. In your book, you talk about the dinner that failed.
Yeah.
And you're starting to tell a story, but I'd love you to tell the story about the dinner that failed, because I think that's part of your origin story and your epiphany bridge, if you will, that got you off to where you are today.
Yeah. So the college had voted 30 years before I became president to build a new library, but had never done it. And I knew that if I was going to be a president that the faculty were excited about, I needed in my first week or two to announce we're going to build that new library. And so we went through a process of getting it designed and all of that. And so then I had to go raise the money for it. And we had a donor who had 3 sons who had graduated from the college. He and his wife, neither one went to college, so they really valued education. They had a magnificent company. He had 2 jet planes. There was plenty of resources there. He had made an earlier $500,000 gift to renovate our chapel. And so I decided this is the gentleman I want to give the lead gift to our library. And so I got everything put together perfectly. I mean, it was the perfect situation. We went to the City Club in downtown Louisville. I had all 3 of his sons and their spouses and his wife, and I had my board chair and wife and my wife with me. It was a perfect setting. And we sat there and had a delightful dinner at which the donor was paying for because we were on his membership. And then we brought in the flip chart with the beautiful renderings of the library. And I told the story that the faculty had been waiting 30 years for this building. And I told them about how many books that we were going to have in there. And I told them about how we were going to let the community come. I just told him about what a great building. And then we asked him, this was 1996, we asked him for $10 million for us to build the building. And he and his wife, who are very spiritual people, he reached over and grabbed her hand. He looked at his sons, who all were in a very positive, shaking their head. Right? He said, well, we will certainly pray about this. And Bill, I'll give you an answer within 2 weeks. So when we left and we got outside to the parking lot where the board chair was parked next to me, we gave each other a high five. On the way to the campus, I called my VP for development and said, we're going to get it. This is just it. We're going to get it. And 2 weeks later, I get the call and he said, Bill, we just don't think this is what we want to do. And I was stunned. I was just absolutely stunned. I was embarrassed because I had indicated to our campus that this was going to happen. And so for about 2 weeks, I was just depressed for sure. But then I woke up one morning and it struck me. I did this all wrong. I did it all wrong. And I realized what I had done is I had gone in there and only talked about the college, only talked about the books, only talked about the board, and I had made a fatal mistake. I did not talk about him and his family first. So I called him, drove the hour and a half back to Louisville, got to his office, and walked into his office and said, "I owe you a big apology. I am so sorry that I didn't listen to your heart. And when I saw you reach over and grab her hand, and I've come to realize that was the most important thing in your life is your relationship." And his name was Clyde. I said, "Clyde, we need her name on the front of our library, so it will be there forever. And that people can come and hear your story and how you went from nothing to there." And he looked at me and he said, "Let's do it." And what I learned, and I teach this now to all of our clients, when you're talking with the donors, it's going to be all about them. But you gotta show them how they matter. And then you can talk about who you are and what you do and how it matters. So that was a real turning point in my, and I've been at it a long time, John. It took me a long time to get to that realization.
Thank you for sharing that story, because I read it in the book, and we got to share this because we've all been through this. I've been through it both on the corporate side and the not-for-profit side. And we've all sort of had these epiphany moments where we keep talking, we'll get into this a little bit, but we keep talking about the what and the how,
Yeah.
but we don't talk about the why.
Right.
And I think that's probably was your first experience, even whether you even had read Simon Sinek's book or not. It was probably your first intuitive of like, wow, I have to talk about why this is important to the donor, not why it's important to Bill or the college or the alumni. First of all, it's a great emotional story. Second of all, it's a story where you have to be a bit vulnerable to tell it. And I think it makes it great for any leader, whether you're in the not-for-profit sector or not, but especially today for trying to raise large donations from donors. And we make this mistake all the time. We talk about all the cool programming we're doing and all the, the kids we're helping and whatever, all the horses that we are making better lives for, blah, blah, blah. But we don't actually necessarily understand why that donor would care.
Yes.
And so probably the next question, which is that's the mindset shift, I think, that every not-for-profit leader would adopt before they sort of make the ask. Would you agree with that?
But absolutely. Absolutely. I recently interviewed a woman billionaire. And I asked her if she would give me 30 minutes to talk with her by Zoom. And I told her I wasn't asking her for a donation. And so we got on the phone and I asked her how she and her husband were making their philanthropic choices now. And she immediately went down the same thing. So we want to know that the people that are asking us for money know who we are. She even went so far as to say, I want to know that they know what art I love and what music I love, that they know a lot about me, and that we can have that kind of relationship. We call it eagle to eagle. It's the executive director, the VP of development rising to the eagle level to have that type of conversation with somebody. That's why we've got this partnership with Crane Stationery. High wealth people use very nice stationery. And she said to me, don't send me a letter on your nonprofit stationery. Send me your personal stationery. I want to know you personally, which is another thing I've learned a lot about. These high wealth people are looking for a relationship with the leadership. They want to know that they trust the leadership, including the board, right? Who's on the board? Do I know these people? If I've seen them in action before, are they people that my gift can be really maximized? And to me, that's not transactional at all. That's relational. And that's what we call donor mapping, which is part of one of our strategies.
It's so relevant. I just had a thought and now it just escaped me. So it'll come back. So you've worked with a lot of not-for-profits, higher education leaders for decades, as we mentioned earlier. And what makes your approach fundamentally different, especially for people that want to try to start transforming the way they're doing fundraising?
We call it, we add the color to what a president will do. I'm working with a college president right now, and he was getting ready to invite 8 potential donors to his office for a luncheon. And so we started talking about who these people were and the agenda. And he said to me, the first thing I'm going to do is to show him the new building that I want. I said, I got a better idea. First thing you do after everybody's seated, I want you to go around the room and say to everybody, let's go around the room. I want to know what your favorite childhood toy was. In the process of their answering that question, you're going to learn about what brings them joy, what brought them happiness. You're going to learn some things about their childhood. You're going to learn some other things that can be important to you as we start building on the relationships, right? And so that's the type of things I said, where are you showing up in the community where people wouldn't expect you to show up, right? How do you, I even asked, what kind of stationery are you using? I'm trying to coach the presidents and executive directors to know what the high wealth world looks like. Because whether we like it or not, there's more money being given in this country today than ever before, but it's being given by fewer people. And it's the high wealth that we call the 95-5 rule. 95% of all the wealth in any community is controlled by 5% of the people. And here we tend to focus on now in the nonprofit world is on the 95%. That's the transactional part. And what we try to say is, let's keep our finger in that pot. Let's keep doing that. But we've got to really focus on who are the 5% of the people in the community who have the resources, and what do we got to do to build relationships with those people. And if they have a horse farm, we better learn a little bit about horses. And when we go out there to see them, we better be in jeans and boots. And not everybody gets that, John. They don't understand. So we spend a lot of time coaching towards the 95-5 rule. As the millionaire woman said to me, she said, Bill, if I were talking to a nonprofit executive and I said to that person, I have to leave to go to the FOB to catch my plane, most of them would not know what an FOB is.
Right.
Right. And they need that. So we've created what we call the presidential toolbox, for 10 things that a president needs to know before they go see high wealth people. And it's because, most CEOs and most in nonprofits, particularly the smaller ones, have low self-esteem when it comes to high wealth family, high wealth asking. I think I mentioned you before, we think about 90% of all people that work for nonprofits grew up in lower to middle class families. And all of a sudden they're being asked out of necessity to start building relationships with high wealth people. We even do etiquette training for some of our clients because we think that's an important part of building the trust relationship with others.
Making the ask, as you say, or even in the corporate world, asking for the order, which are essentially the same. It's hard. I don't care how I spent my entire career in business development and sales and consulting and stuff. And it's hard. You don't want to come off sleazy. You don't want to come off like you're greedy. You don't want to come off desperate. And you're right. And then you add on top of that, well, now you're talking to somebody that's flying on private jets and's got 5 houses around the world. I can see how just a little bit of coaching really could make a big difference. Again, building that personal connection, empathizing with the donor, understanding why they want to give money versus to what they want to give money to, things like that.
Another thing I would point out real quickly is, so we bring a lot of fun. We don't think that there's enough fun going on within the shops. And just give you an example, everybody knows that women over 70 are a very important group right now because this $1 trillion transfer of wealth that's coming on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we will go into a place and they'll have a tea at 10 o'clock at some place for the women to come. And what we're learning, that's not what women over the age of 70 want. You know, the older you get, the more questions you have about your value. Yeah, if I'm 86 years old sitting in a senior living home, what's my value to the world? And what we're saying is give them value. So we'll take a women in philanthropy group, which a lot of places have, and we don't call it that. We call it grandmothers that give a hoot. And we invite them to the college to play games, to do things, to have activities where they're relating to the people that we're serving, and to keep saying to them, you matter, because one thing we know about grandmothers, they care about their grandchildren. And that's a heart thing. It has nothing to do with what building we want to build. It has showing these women, they still have value. It relating to college students is really can be a very powerful thing. So that's how we do our stuff.
Interesting. Excellent. So we're starting to wrap this up, but so before we do, is there any one insight or lesson you think a not-for-profit leader needs to hear, before what they should do, but they don't often do just because they don't think they have time?
I think it's call it compartmentalization. What we think is that if a CEO or executive director would take 2 hours a week alone in a place where there's no distraction and totally focus on fundraising, they would raise so much more money than they do now. And we even have an agenda for those 2 hours. So we want you to write four handwritten notes. And the 4 handwritten notes are looking backwards. We want you to write the former board chairs. We want you to write somebody who gave an estate gifts family. We want you to do that. We like the fact we say for colleges and for others, whenever you have somebody in you're a donor who dies, fly your flag at half mast. Not the American flag, but your organization's flag. Take a picture of it, frame it, and send it to the family and say how much you matter. Then we want the president to make 2 phone calls during this 2 hours. Then we want the president reading Start with Heart or some fundraising book, a couple of chapters. But what happens is we get so distracted, and the fundraising piece often falls to the 8 o'clock at night piece. Mm-hmm. And we think it's about intentionality, 2 hours a week, very purposeful, and getting a lot accomplished.
Well, and the 8 o'clock at night strategy fails just because your brain is just not as fresh. I don't care how old you are. These kind of things, when you're going to deep thinking and intentional work, particularly today's sort of interrupt-driven world, I find is you got to get some of that. Just wake up in the morning and do that first thing and get it over with. Right? Otherwise, you just kick that can down the road and you'll procrastinate. And then some fire drill will come up, something with the programming. That's great advice. All right. So just to sort of wrap it up, and start with why. Back to Simon Sinek, who famously reminds us that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And Bill, what I really appreciate about this conversation is how clearly you are reframing the why behind fundraising, not as the transaction, but as an act of leadership and human connection. And with that said, we're going to have a follow-on episode, and I'll be sitting down with Greg Warner, the CEO and founder of MarketSmart, to explore how these ideas get operationalized through systems, signals, and disciplines at scale. Because as we just discussed, philosophy without systems doesn't scale, and systems without heart don't last. So Bill, for our listeners who want to learn more about you, your work, book, BrightDot, what's the best place to start? How do they get a hold of you? What are your socials?
Yeah, so we're very active on LinkedIn, Facebook. So you can just type in BrightDot and you'll find us. Or my email is bill@thebrightdot.com. And we have some really great conversations that we would love to have with you if you're interested. But I think this is a golden moment for fundraisers 2026. I think because of donor advised funds, the IRA distribution, the tax law changes, it's a golden moment. 2026 could be one of the biggest philanthropic years ever. And we've got some thoughts about that.
That's a topic for a whole other podcast that we might want to do. We will include all of those links into the show notes. I will definitely put a plug in for your book. Start with the Heart. It's a good read. It's a quick read. It's available on Amazon and all the other places you can buy books. And
I want to go back to the why. Understanding your why and understanding the why of the people who work with you. We've identified 9 different whys that employees can have. It's so critical if you're going to serve others and want to know about their why. Getting to know a donor's why is the key to successful fundraising in the future.
Great advice. So, again, I'm John Kundtz. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Disruptor Podcast. Have a great day.